Hi guys, this is Ray with Phone Arena and you're watching our video comparison between the Sony Xperia Z1 Compact and the HTC One. Two very beautiful premium smartphones, one with a compact form factor, the other not so much. But the Z1 Compact here is one generation newer, so let's see how it stacks up against the very popular Android powerhouse that the HTC One is. The Z1 Compact is distinguished by its omni-balanced design language and looks a lot like the rest of the Sony Xperia family of devices. The phone sports an all-glass front and back with a metal frame hugging its profile, all of which set it apart from the plastic sea of Android phones. The premium effect is slightly diminished as both the left and right side of the device are littered with port, flaps and power, volume and shutter keys. Those are well built, however, and provide satisfying feedback. On the back you are treated to a markedly different view. The glass is only occupied by the camera and LED flash units, along with the Sony and Xperia logos, giving it a much cleaner look. But the high-end looks of the Z1 Compact are faltering when put next to the aluminum-clad HTC One. The industrial design of HTC's flagship, along with the various but simplistic ornaments throughout, give it a hint over Sony's petite handset. The front of the HTC One leaves a lasting impression thanks to the stereo boom sound speakers on the top and bottom. Seeing as the One is also a pretty narrow but tall device, we're also forced to exert some serious effort to reach something as essential as the power key on the top. In comparison, the Z1 Compact manages a more ergonomic feel despite its dust and waterproof IP58 certified body. Handling the device one-handed is a pleasure thanks to its petite proportions and adequately placed buttons. It honestly feels like, for once, Sony is the one making a slightly better use of space. Sony's stubbornness has finally receded and the company has fitted an IPS LCD panel in the Z1 Compact. The fairly dense 720 by 1280 pixel screen has an accurate color temperature of about 7250 Kelvin, with brightness peaking at the excellent 515 nits. On the other hand, the HTC One's 1080 by 1920 pixel with 469 ppi Super LCD 3 screen is sharper, though it's less visible in bright sunlight with peak brightness of about 460 nits. Its color temperature is also less on target at 7656 Kelvin. So whites exhibit a cold overtone, but gamma is spot on at 2.2, especially compared to the 2.6 for the Z1 Compact. Overall, colors are reproduced correctly by both displays, though Sony's screen is slightly more true to the actual target colors. On the other hand, the One's display is considerably sharper and also disproportionately bigger, as it houses the software navigation buttons on its bezel, unlike the Z1 Compact. When it comes down to calling this, we thought that the One is the slightly better option, as we felt that the added benefits of a larger, crisper display make up for the minuscule superiority of the Z1 Compact's panel in terms of color fidelity. Both Sony and HTC have gone down the path of customizing the Android user experience on their devices. The Xperia user interface on the Z1 Compact is based on Android 4.3, and so is the Sense 5.5 skin of HTC One. Taking a look at the Z1 Compact, it feels more familiar, especially if you've come across a stock Android experience before. Things like the home screen are easily adjustable and there really is no lack of themes and personalization options with Sony's firmware. Next to it, the HTC One looks flat and conservative in its expression, but that also gives it a more restrained, respectable look. It feels like a user interface fit for adults, with features like blink feed providing you with an easy way to stay in touch. But there's a learning curve to getting the most of either handset, and one can hardly contest that. Both devices make use of a large, properly spaced out keyboard, though typing on the Z1 Compact obviously requires more of an effort, even though the layout is more spaced out in comparison. Simply putting the internals of the Sony Xperia Z1 Compact and HTC One side by side leaves little to decipher. The former is the more potent device of the two. This is to be expected though, as the newer Z1 Compact is outfitted with Qualcomm's best, the quad-core 2.2 GHz Snapdragon 800, whereas HTC's aging flagship is powered by the now older quad-core 1.7 GHz Snapdragon 600. In addition, it sure helps that the Z1 Compact Silicon has to push considerably fewer pixels on the screen, whereas the once inferior processor has to carry the full weight of an 1080p display. The One is also a notch behind the Z1 Compact when it comes to memory. Unlike the One's 2GB of LPDDR2 RAM, Sony's phone is equipped with faster 2GB of dual-channel LPDDR3 RAM. Moreover, the Z1 Compact enjoys the luxury that a microSD card slot is these days, whereas the One is stuck with what it has built in. With the above in mind, it shouldn't surprise anybody that the Z1 Compact consistently beat the HTC One in each and every synthetic benchmark. The difference is especially profound in gaming, where the fancier Adreno 330 manages the more than adequate 54 FPS under GFX Bench's Egypt HD 2.5 test, whereas the Adreno 320 on the One struggles greatly to get over the 30 FPS threshold. Thanks to its more capable processor, the browsing experience on the Z1 Compact is a notch above what you get with the One. Surfing the web on both devices is a breeze, as they both have Chrome built in. Though with the HTC One, its in-house Android browser is the default option. Regardless of which one you stick with, both are about as equally functional and perform pretty much on par, and yet the Z1 Compact Snapdragon 800 chip obviously renders pages just a tad faster. Both the Z1 Compact and the HTC One pack some interesting camera tech and features, but before we get into comparing stills, let's cover some aspects of the two shooters. The Z1 Compact sports the same impressive 20.7 megapixel 1/2.3-inch Exmor RS sensor as the Xperia Z1, along with a wide f2.0 aperture. The HTC One makes a less impressive showing as its 4 megapixel f2.0 aperture ultra-pixel camera lags behind the units found on rival flagships. The ultra-pixel moniker serves to distinguish the fact that the Taiwanese company has fitted extra-large 2.0 micron pixels versus 1.17 microns for the Z1 Compact, which should capture more light as to help with low-light shots. HTC, however, is also using a much smaller 1/3-inch sensor, which provides less of a total surface area dedicated to capturing light. But how do these two perform in the real world when put side by side? Well, for starters, the Z1 Compact allows you to snap photos slightly faster than the HTC One. Synthetic benchmarks, on the other hand, give the edge to the Taiwanese flagship, though we tend to attach a heavier weight to a real-world performance. As for the quality of snaps, the Z1 Compact obviously produces considerably more detailed but softer stills during the day. That said, do keep in mind that in superior auto mode, the Z1 Compact usually snaps 8 megapixel shots, which are then enhanced using pixel binning technology, which essentially combines information from multiple pixels in order to arrive at a generally clearer and less noisy pictures. Next to that, the ultra-pixel camera on the One manages some rather sharp photos, but detail is quickly lost once you start zooming in. The two cameras set their respective level of exposure accurately for the most part, though the HTC One is perhaps slightly more prone to misjudgments. The One also tends to exaggerate colors a bit, ending up with warmer, eye-catching but ultimately inaccurate snaps, whereas the Z1 Compact is uncompromisingly distant from such tricks. Indoors, the HTC One's camera arrives at snaps that exhibit warmer and more saturated colors, especially compared to the colder, less lively shots from the Z1 Compact. The roles are switched, however, once the light goes completely out. The One goes from warm to ice cold, and its important flash simply falters in comparison with the one on Sony's phone. For its part, the Z1 Compact's LED flash manages to lit up the scene, and there's much more detail to be seen. Looking at video capture, the two shooters are a bit better matched, at least during the day. Both units capture a pleasant amount of detail, though the HTC One produces some palpably darker footage. On the other hand, and especially at night, the Z1 Compact produces more noise in comparison, and it's still a notch colder than the more inviting, warm colors of the HTC One. Unfortunately, however, video capture in darkness is a bit tragic in the case of the latter, as the frame rate drops to some seriously choppy levels. So, in a nutshell, if a quality camera is among your priorities, then the choice is fairly easy. The 20.7 megapixel Z1 Compact triumphs. Both phones have more than a capable chip to render and encode different kinds of videos at 1080p without a sweat, but there is more to a proper multimedia device than just that. We dare say that the HTC One smokes the Z1 Compact in this particular department, as it's got the advantage of bigger, more detailed screen, but also far more potent audio capabilities. The front-facing boom sound stereo speakers offer some truly immersive sound, and they are also noticeably louder than the mono speaker on the Z1 Compact. The same holds true when talking about the headphones that go with either smartphone. The earphones on the HTC One are just more potent. Call quality is another area where the HTC One shines, thanks to the top boom sound speaker, which doubles up as an earpiece. Sound is loud and rich, voices are transmitted pleasantly across the network, and callers' voices are not distorted. The other side also hears you well, as the microphone setup on the One picks even nuances in your voice and renders them properly. Next to it, the Z1 Compact sounds less impressive, but its speaker and microphone only suffer a defeat at the hands of a device that has some serious chops in this regard, as they are very much up to standard and do not disappoint. Both the Xperia Z1 Compact and the HTC One have to make do with an embedded 2300 mAh cell. The less demanding screen and more efficient processor on the Z1 Compact give it a leg up over the HTC One, though both are far from the most enduring devices out there. Sony, for its part, rates the battery of the Z1 Compact as good as 18 hours of talk time and 25 days of standby while connected to a 3G network. These figures are slightly lower in the case of the One, at 18 hours of talk time and 20.8 days of standby. Both the Z1 Compact and the HTC One are incredibly well-made devices. The Z1 Compact has a slightly smaller form factor, which is going to make it easier to carry around or operate with. Meanwhile, the HTC One has this larger display, which is going to make multimedia content consumption that much more enjoyable. Meanwhile, the Z1 Compact has a slight advantage in the chipset department with its Snapdragon 800 CPU against the Snapdragon 600 of the HTC One. Though having in mind the current generation of Android software, the difference in performance that you're going to experience won't be that big. Where the big difference is, though, is the 20 megapixel G-Lens camera of the Xperia Z1. It's miles ahead of the 4 megapixel ultra pixel shooter of the HTC One. So if you're currently on the lookout for a new smartphone, we would say that the Z1 Compact is the better choice, as long as you don't mind the relatively small screen. However, if you're currently sporting the HTC One and are wondering whether it's a good idea to upgrade to a Z1 Compact, I would say no, it isn't, as long as you're fine with its 4 megapixel camera.